It was supposed to be a new beginning, but instead it became the morning my world collapsed. I still remember the sharp sting of the cold Boston air sneaking through the cracks of our small apartment, the soft cries of my newborn twins filling the space, and the heavy silence that clung to everything like a funeral shroud. I had just finished feeding them, cradling their tiny bodies close to my chest, when I heard the front door creak open. My heart leapt with hope. Maybe Ethan had returned to start the life he had promised us. Maybe the man I loved hadn't changed as much as I feared. I turned with a smile, only for it to freeze on my lips. Ethan stood there, framed by the doorway, his face pale and hollow, his eyes distant as if he were looking at something, or someone, far beyond me. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, and the sight sent a chill spiraling down my spine. Something was wrong. I set the babies gently back into their crib, my hands trembling slightly as I tucked the soft blanket around them. "Ethan?" I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of dread. He didn't answer at first. He just stared at the floor, breathing heavily, like he was preparing for a battle he knew he would lose. Finally, he looked up and I saw it, the decision already carved into his features. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and broken. I felt the ground shift beneath me, but I nodded numbly, urging him to continue, even though every cell in my body screamed for him to stay silent. Ethan took a long, shuddering breath, then forced the words out like they were razors on his tongue. "I can't do this anymore. I have to leave." For a moment, I couldn't process what he had said. I blinked at him, confused, as if hearing a language I didn't understand. "Leave?" I echoed, barely a whisper. "What do you mean, leave?" He shifted his weight from foot to foot, his gaze darting anywhere but at me. "My mother, she was right. You and I, we don't belong in the same world." I thought I could fight it, but I can't. The room seemed to tilt, and I had to grip the side of the crib to steady myself. The babies stirred at the sudden tension, their tiny faces crumpling as if sensing the devastation unfolding around them. Tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them fall. "Not yet. You're leaving me?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Leaving your own children?" Ethan's face contorted with something like guilt, but he said nothing. His silence was more damning than any confession. In that moment, I realized the truth. The man I had loved, the man who once promised to stand by me through everything, was already gone. What stood before me now was a stranger, a coward, a puppet still tethered to the woman who had hated me from the start. He turned to leave, his hand resting on the doorknob for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, and then he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him, the final nail in the coffin of our life together. I stood there, motionless, as the soft whimpers of my twins grew louder, their cries slicing through the suffocating silence. I crumpled to the floor, burying my face in my hands, and for the first time since the nightmare had begun, I allowed myself to break. The sobs tore out of me, raw and uncontrollable, shaking my entire body. I cried for the love that had died, for the promises shattered, for the future stolen from me. But most of all, I cried for my children who would grow up without a father's love, not because of some unavoidable tragedy, but because he had chosen to abandon them. The morning light streamed weakly through the dirty window, casting long, cold shadows across the room. Somewhere deep inside me, a small voice whispered that this was only the beginning, and the hardest part was still to come. If you had asked me back then, I would have said it was fate. I met Ethan Caldwell on a crisp October afternoon, when the golden leaves of Boston's public garden swirled around my feet and the world felt wide open and full of promise. I had just moved to the city, fresh out of college, armed with little more than a degree in interior design and dreams too big for my tiny savings account. I was rushing to a job interview, balancing a coffee and a portfolio under my arm, when a gust of wind knocked my papers loose and sent them flying across the sidewalk. And that's when Ethan appeared. He helped me gather the scattered drawings, his warm smile and steady hands calming the chaos I felt inside. His eyes were a striking shade of deep blue, and when he looked at me, it was as if he truly saw me, not just the nervous young woman scrambling after her future. We ended up talking for hours at a small cafe tucked between rows of brownstones, the city fading around us as laughter and easy conversation filled the space between us. At the time, I had no idea who he really was. To me, he was just Ethan, not the heir to Caldwell Estates, one of the most powerful real estate dynasties stretching from Boston to Miami. He didn't flaunt it. No designer suits, no air of superiority, just a worn leather jacket, an easy grin, and a voice that made promises sound like they could actually be kept. We fell fast. We fell hard. It was the kind of love that felt inevitable, the kind you read about but rarely believe could happen to you. Ethan wasn't like the other men I'd met in the city, the ones who measured your worth in business cards or designer labels. He was kind, grounded, and he made me believe that love could conquer anything, even the brutal walls of the world he came from. The early days were a dream. Weekend trips to Cape Cod, late nights sketching our future together on napkins, whispered promises shared under the stars. It was everything I had ever wanted, everything I had dared to hope for. When Ethan proposed 6 months later, under the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree in the Boston Commons, I said yes without a second thought. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was. Love, I thought, was enough. It didn't matter that I didn't come from money, that my family name carried no prestige. It didn't matter that his world was built on generational wealth and silent expectations. I believed that what we had was stronger than all of that, and for a while it was. When I found out I was pregnant, Ethan's joy was blinding. He twirled me around our tiny apartment, laughing with pure wonder, his hands cradling my belly as if already feeling the tiny heartbeats within. "We'll protect them," he whispered against my skin. "No matter what. You, me, and our little family, nothing else matters." For a moment, I let myself believe it. I let myself imagine a life where love would shield us from judgment, where determination could outpace disdain. I ignored the small voice in the back of my mind, the one that whispered about the world we would be up against, the one that wore pearls and diamonds and judged women like me without mercy. But love, no matter how fierce, how pure, is sometimes not enough to withstand the forces that lurk behind closed doors, forces like Eleanor Caldwell, forces that wear a mother's smile but wield a heart made of stone. And even as Ethan kissed my forehead and whispered promises of forever, a shadow had already begun to stretch over us, one I was too blinded by hope to see. The first time I met Eleanor Caldwell, it felt like stepping onto a battlefield dressed for a garden party. Ethan had insisted it was just a casual gathering at the Caldwell estate, a chance for me to meet some of his extended family and friends. He had smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Don't be nervous. They're just people." But as we pulled up the winding driveway and the towering stone mansion loomed into view, my heart sank because everything about that place screamed that I didn't belong. Inside, the estate glittered under the weight of old money. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above marble floors, and oil paintings of stern ancestors glared down from gilded frames. Men in tailored suits murmured about stocks and politics, while women draped in silk and diamonds eyed one another with veiled disdain. I clutched Ethan's hand tightly, my pulse hammering in my ears, and tried to smile, but it felt like trying to stay afloat in a storm. And then I saw her. Eleanor Caldwell sat at the center of the grand room like a queen, holding court. A glass of deep red wine rested in her manicured hand, her steel-gray eyes sweeping the room with clinical precision. She was elegant, poised, and utterly terrifying. When her gaze landed on me, it was as if a blade had been drawn silently across my skin. She rose from her chair with the grace of someone used to commanding attention without lifting her voice. Crossing the room slowly, she approached us, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. Every conversation around us seemed to hush, the air thick with expectation. "Ethan," she said warmly, kissing his cheek with a familiarity that spoke volumes. Then, turning to me, she offered her hand, a smile curving her lips but not reaching her eyes. "And you must be Sophia." I took her hand, and despite my best effort to hide it, I flinched slightly at the chill of her touch. "It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Caldwell," I said, forcing my voice steady. Her smile sharpened, a wolf smile hidden behind pearls and politeness. "Daniel tells me you're expecting," she said, her voice as smooth and cold as the marble underfoot. How unexpected! I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The weight of her gaze pinned me in place. Ethan shifted uncomfortably beside me, squeezing my hand, but I could feel the tension radiating from him like heat off asphalt. Eleanor said nothing else to me that night. She didn't have to. Every glance, every slight tilt of her head, every carefully orchestrated silence shouted the truth. I was not welcome here. I was an outsider, a blemish on their carefully curated legacy. The evening dragged on, a blur of forced smiles and veiled barbs, until finally, mercifully, we left. As the car pulled away from the estate, I turned to Ethan, searching his face for reassurance, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. In the days that followed, things began to shift. At first, it was subtle: missed calls, distracted conversations, nights he came home late, smelling faintly of expensive scotch and expensive pressure. He insisted everything was fine, that I was imagining things, but the distance between us grew with each passing day. And always, in the back of my mind, lurked the memory of Eleanor's cold smile, and the sinking certainty that she had set something in motion that night, something I couldn't yet name, but could feel tightening around me like an invisible noose. By the time I felt the first pangs of labor, I barely recognized the man who paced nervously beside my hospital bed. His body was there, but his heart, his mind had already begun slipping away, and I was too busy clinging to hope to see it. The night our twins were born, the city of Boston was drenched in rain, the streets slick and glistening under the amber streetlights. Inside the hospital room, the storm outside seemed a distant hum compared to the storm brewing inside me. I gripped Ethan's hand tightly, feeling the fire of each contraction tear through me, but focusing only on the man who was supposed to be my anchor. For a moment, just a fleeting, precious moment, he was there, smiling down at me, tears in his eyes as he whispered, "You're doing amazing, Sophia, just a little more." When our children arrived, one boy, one girl, the world should have stopped in wonder. Ethan held them both, cradling their tiny bodies with trembling hands, a soft, astonished laugh breaking from his lips. "They're perfect," he said, voice thick with emotion. I believed him. I needed to believe him. I clung to that image with everything I had. But even then, even in the glow of that miraculous moment, I could feel it, the invisible wall that had grown between us. It wasn't just exhaustion in his eyes. It was something else. Something final. We brought the babies home to our small apartment 2 days later. The nursery wasn't much, just a corner of the bedroom sectioned off with a thrifted crib and hand-painted stars on the walls. But it was filled with dreams. Dreams I had woven carefully, lovingly, around our little family. Dreams that began unraveling the very next morning. Ethan left early, mumbling something about work, about needing to check in at the office. He didn't kiss me goodbye. He barely looked at me. I stood there, swaying with exhaustion, 2 tiny miracles sleeping behind me, trying to tell myself it was just stress, just pressure, just temporary. Days blurred into nights. Nights blurred into aching, sleepless marathons of feeding, burping, soothing, crying. I barely noticed the growing emptiness until it became impossible to ignore. Ethan's absences grew longer, his excuses thinner, his eyes colder, and then came that morning. He came home early. I heard the door open and close softly. My heart leapt despite itself, desperate for a sign, a word, anything that might stitch the widening rift between us. I was sitting on the floor by the crib, humming softly to the babies when he entered the room. I looked up, hopeful, and my heart shattered before he even spoke. He couldn't meet my eyes. His shoulders sagged under an invisible weight. His mouth opened and closed, struggling for words, and finally, with a voice so small it barely reached me, he said, "Sophia, we need to talk." I knew. I knew before he even finished. Still, I asked because some cruel part of me needed to hear it aloud. Talk about what? He closed his eyes, breathing out a tremor of regret. "I can't stay. I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore." The room spun. I clutched the side of the crib to steady myself, feeling the world crumble around me. "You can't stay?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "You're leaving your own children?" Ethan flinched like I had struck him, but he didn't take it back. He didn't even try. "My mother was right," he muttered, shame coloring his words. "We don't belong together. You don't fit." Tears streamed down my face, hot and furious and helpless. "So you're just walking away?" I choked out, "Just like that?" He didn't answer. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he didn't dare. Without another word, he turned and walked away, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality that echoed through the hollow chambers of my soul. I stood there, frozen, listening to the babies stir, their tiny whimpers piercing the silence, and it hit me like a physical blow. I was alone, utterly, completely alone, and no amount of love, no amount of promises once made under golden leaves and autumn skies could change that now. The days that followed were not days at all. They were endless, shapeless voids, stitched together by exhaustion, sorrow, and the mechanical demands of survival. I moved through them like a ghost, caring for my newborns because I had no other choice, because their tiny faces were the only tether keeping me from sinking entirely into the dark. The apartment felt unbearably silent without Ethan's presence, though in truth he had been slipping away long before the door finally closed behind him. Every creak of the floorboards, every passing car outside, every knock at the door made my heart lurch with desperate hope. But it was never him. It never would be again. At night, when the babies finally drifted into restless sleep, I would sit on the cold hardwood floor, staring at the thin crack under the door where light from the hallway spilled into the room, and I would cry. Silent, shattering sobs that ripped through my chest until there was nothing left inside but a hollow ache. I cried for the life we were supposed to have, for the promises broken so easily, for the love I had foolishly believed could conquer everything. I stopped answering my phone. Friends, coworkers, acquaintances, they all called, worried, offering help I didn't know how to accept. What could I say? That I had been abandoned like discarded furniture? That I was now a mother of two, alone, without a job, without family close by, without a clue how I would survive the next week, let alone the next year? I couldn't even bring myself to speak the words out loud, because saying them would make them real. The walls of the apartment seemed to close in tighter with each passing day. Bills piled up on the counter unopened. The fridge grew emptier. The landlord's reminders about the rent became colder, more insistent. Meanwhile, diapers, formula, baby wipes, all disappeared with frightening speed. I had saved a little, but not enough, never enough. I thought of calling Ethan once. Just once. My hand even hovered over the phone. But then I saw the sleeping faces of my children, so peaceful, so trusting, and I realized that whatever strength I had left, it had to be for them. Not for a man who had turned his back on us the moment life demanded more than pretty words and easy affection. Still, some nights, the loneliness was unbearable. I would sit by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, feeling the vast, uncaring world pulse just beyond reach. Boston's city lights glittered in the distance, vibrant and alive, and I had never felt so isolated. There were moments I wondered if anyone would notice if we simply disappeared, if anyone would care. One particularly cold night, when the twins had finally fallen asleep, I found myself kneeling beside the crib, my hands trembling as I adjusted their blankets. I whispered promises to them in the dark, promises I wasn't sure I could keep. I don't know how. I said softly, tears blurring my vision, but I will find a way. I have to. That night, something shifted inside me. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't immediate, but it was there. A tiny, stubborn ember in the wreckage. A flicker of understanding that no one was coming to save me. And if I wanted to survive, if I wanted my children to have even a chance, I had to be stronger than the grief trying to drown me. I had to become something else, someone else. The sun rose the next morning, pale and hesitant over the frozen rooftops, and for the first time since Ethan left, I didn't crumble when I opened my eyes. I moved through the small apartment with deliberate steps, feeding the babies, changing them, rocking them back to sleep. I brewed a pot of cheap coffee, ignoring the hollow ache in my stomach. And then I sat at the kitchen table with my battered laptop, staring at a blank screen, fingers hovering uncertainly over the keys. It was time to try, to rebuild, to crawl out of the wreckage he had left behind, no matter how impossible it felt. Because the truth was cruel but simple. No one else was coming. The first time I sat down to rebuild my life, it wasn't with some grand plan or soaring ambition. It was pure necessity, raw survival. I needed to find a way to provide for my children, and no one was going to offer it to me. I sent out resume after resume, desperate for any job that could accommodate the erratic needs of 2 newborns. But reality slammed into me harder than any rejection letter. No one wanted to hire a woman who had just given birth to twins, who couldn't stay late, who couldn't work weekends, who couldn't guarantee she'd be available at a moment's notice. Some recruiters didn't even pretend to hide their disdain. Others simply stopped responding. The money dwindled, faster than I expected, faster than I could control. I rationed formula, skipped meals, sold off what few valuables I had left. I rocked my babies at night, feeling the gnawing hunger clawing at my own stomach, whispering to myself that tomorrow would be better. It had to be. One evening, after another string of rejection emails, I sat at the cracked kitchen table, my head in my hands, feeling the walls press closer than ever. My babies lay asleep nearby, dressed in the tiny outfits I had sewn for them when I couldn't afford anything else. Clothes made from leftover fabric scraps, stitched together by trembling fingers. I looked at them, their tiny chests rising and falling in innocent trust, and an idea, wild and ridiculous and impossible, sparked somewhere in the wreckage of my mind. If no one would hire me, I would hire myself. It sounded absurd. I wasn't a fashion designer. I didn't have investors. I didn't have a team. All I had was an old second-hand sewing machine borrowed from the elderly neighbor downstairs, a handful of fabric, and the stubborn belief that maybe, just maybe, I could create something better than the overpriced, uncomfortable baby clothes lining the shelves of department stores. I called it Bright Nest, a place where little ones could be wrapped not just in fabric, but in hope, in resilience, in the love that had survived everything. The first pieces were simple, stretchy leggings, soft onesies, cozy hats, all made during stolen moments between feedings and diaper changes. I photographed them as best I could, using my battered phone and a bedsheet for a backdrop. I built a small, clumsy website late at night while the twins slept beside me, their breath steady and rhythmic, the only music in my new world. I emailed bloggers, influencers, parenting groups. Most never replied. A few sent polite rejections. One woman placed a tiny order, a single onesie, but canceled it the next day without explanation. Every setback felt personal, like the universe laughing at my foolishness. Doubt seeped in, slow and corrosive. Was I wasting time that could be better spent begging for a job? Any job? Was I foolish to think I could build something when everything else had crumbled so easily? One night, after another fruitless day, I curled up beside the crib, clutching one of the little outfits I had made. Tears slid down my face, hot and bitter. But somewhere in the midst of that despair, I looked at my baby sleeping peacefully, dressed in clothes crafted by my own broken hands, and something inside me refused to quit. Maybe the world didn't care. Maybe success would never come. But these two little souls, they deserved a mother who tried. So I tried. I refined my designs. I took better photos. I reworked the website. I stayed up until dawn stitching and sewing and learning, pushing through the exhaustion that blurred my vision. For weeks, there was nothing. No orders. No hope. And then, one morning, a notification blinked across my cracked phone screen. Order received. One bright Nest Soft onesie. It was a small order. Tiny. Insignificant by any real measure. But to me, it was everything. The first order gave me hope. But hope alone didn't pay for diapers or rent. I kept working, pouring every ounce of energy into Bright Nest, even when the days bled into nights and the nights into exhausted mornings. I juggled everything. Feedings, diaper changes, endless sewing, and hand packing every tiny package that left my apartment. Each sale was a small victory, a reminder that maybe, just maybe, I was clawing my way out of the pit that had swallowed me whole. But it was slow, so painfully slow. Some weeks I would only get 1 or 2 orders, barely enough to cover a bag of formula, and there were nights I still cried quietly into my pillow, wondering if I was chasing a dream that would never grow beyond the walls of our crumbling apartment. Then, one evening, everything changed. I had sent a sample package to a parenting influencer, a woman with hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram, without expecting anything. I had almost forgotten about it entirely, until my phone buzzed with a notification that made my heart stop. She had posted about Bright Nest. A simple photo, her smiling baby girl, wrapped in one of my handmade onesies, the caption gushing about the quality, the softness, the love stitched into every seam. She called Bright Nest a hidden gem for moms who want their babies wrapped in comfort and care. Within minutes, my inbox exploded. Messages from mothers flooded in, asking about sizes, colors, custom orders. My tiny website, which had limped along in quiet obscurity, suddenly crashed from the surge of traffic. I stared at the error screen, blinking, my brain struggling to catch up, and then I laughed a wild, disbelieving laugh that startled the twins awake. Orders poured in faster than I could process them. 10, 20, 100. I lost count. I called my elderly neighbor downstairs, begging for her help packing shipments. I hand-wrote thank you notes at 2 in the morning, bleary-eyed but exhilarated. The following days were a whirlwind. I sourced more fabric, hired a local seamstress part-time, expanded my little operation from a corner of my living room to a cramped but functional workspace 2 blocks away. Bright Nest was no longer just an idea, it was becoming real, tangible, alive. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I was alive too. Every smile from a satisfied customer, every photo of a happy baby wearing my designs, was a stitch repairing the pieces of my broken heart. Every sale was a reminder that I was more than what Ethan had left behind. I was building something beautiful from the ruins. 6 months after that first viral post, Bright Nest wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. We had regular customers, glowing reviews, and features in 2 local parenting magazines. I hired 2 more seamstresses, moved into a small but bright storefront on the edge of Boston's South End, and began dreaming even bigger. One night, as I sat on the worn couch in our new, slightly less cramped apartment, I watched my twins giggling on the carpet, wearing matching outfits I'd sewn myself. The city lights flickered beyond the window, and for once, they didn't feel so distant they felt like they were shining just for us. I realized, in that moment, that I had done it. Not because someone had rescued me, not because a man had come back to fix what he broke, but because I refused to let the darkness win, because I had fought inch by inch, stitch by stitch, for a life worthy of my children and of myself. And as I looked at their sleepy smiles, their tiny hands reaching for me, I knew this was only the beginning. It happened on an ordinary Sunday morning, the kind of day that no longer carried the weight of sadness, but instead hummed with quiet joy. I had taken the twins to Charles River Esplanade, a place where the grass was lush and the water sparkled under the spring sun. The laughter of my children filled the air as they chased after bubbles, their little hands reaching for the sky. And for once, I allowed myself to simply breathe, to exist without fear. That's when I felt it, a gaze heavy and hesitant, resting on me from across the park. I turned slowly, and there he was, Ethan. Time had not been kind to him. His face, once youthful and full of effortless charm, was lined and hollow. His shoulders sagged under the weight of choices he could no longer outrun. He stood there for a moment, unsure, like a man on the wrong side of a locked door. Our eyes met. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I simply watched him, calm, detached, feeling nothing but a distant curiosity, the way one might observe an old photograph, faded with time. He took a few hesitant steps forward, his hands twisting nervously at his sides. "Sophia," he said, his voice cracked and soft, barely carrying over the breeze. I saw you on TV." I tilted my head slightly, offering nothing more than a polite, expectant silence. He swallowed hard, looking down at the ground like a boy caught in a lie. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. Not because I expect you to forgive me, but because I need you to know. I regret everything." For a moment, the world seemed to hush around us, the river, the laughter, the wind, all pausing as if to listen. I let the silence stretch, feeling the weight of it settle around us, and then I said, very softly, "Are you done?" He looked up, startled by the steadiness in my voice. Perhaps he had expected tears. Perhaps he had expected anger. But there was nothing left for him to hurt. I had already rebuilt myself from the ashes he left behind. I smiled, a quiet, liberated smile, and added, "Because I don't need your regret, Ethan. I don't need your love or your apology." He opened his mouth to speak, but I shook my head gently. "I've built a life," I continued, "a life that doesn't have room for ghosts." His face crumpled then, the reality of it sinking in deeper than any words I could have spoken. I turned back toward my children, who were now waving eagerly at me from across the grass, their laughter like a melody no betrayal could touch. Without another word, I walked away. And Ethan, he stayed standing there, rooted to the spot, a man who had traded his soul for a world that never loved him back, and had realized it far, far too late. Ethan didn't go home right away. Maybe he didn't know where home was anymore. Eventually, though, his steps dragged him back to the only place he had left, the Caldwell estate. The grand mansion loomed against the fading light, its towering columns and manicured gardens standing just as they always had. But somehow it looked smaller now, emptier, as if it too had grown tired of pretending. Inside, the house was bathed in the sterile glow of crystal chandeliers, their cold light bouncing off marble floors and priceless art. The scent of oak and old money lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. Eleanor Caldwell sat in her favorite armchair by the fireplace, a glass of red wine swirling lazily in her hand. She didn't look up as Ethan entered. She didn't have to. She knew. "So," she said, her voice smooth and detached, "did you finally realize the woman you abandoned wasn't waiting around for you?" Her words struck like a slap, but Ethan didn't react. He simply stood there, his hands hanging uselessly by his sides, the hollowness in his chest threatening to consume him. "You say that like you're proud," he said quietly. Eleanor finally looked up then, her steely eyes sharp and unyielding. "I am proud," she said. "I saved you from a mistake that would have cost you everything." Ethan let out a bitter laugh, dry, humorless, echoing off the empty walls. "Everything," he repeated. "You think this." He gestured around the cavernous, silent room. "This is everything." Eleanor's smile didn't falter. "You have your place, Ethan. Your legacy." "My legacy," he whispered, the words tasting like ash. "All I have is this empty shell. A title, a fortune, a house that feels more like a mausoleum than a home." Eleanor set her glass down with a sharp clink. "Don't be dramatic. You have what matters." "No," Ethan said, his voice steady now. "I had what mattered. and I let it slip through my fingers because I was too much of a coward to stand up to you. The room crackled with the tension of things long left unsaid. Eleanor rose to her feet, her expression tightening. So what now? You want to blame me for your weakness? I want to leave, Ethan said simply. I don't want any of this. Not the name, not the fortune, not the emptiness. Eleanor's mouth opened, a retort forming on her tongue. But for the first time, she found no words. Ethan turned without waiting for her response. His footsteps echoed through the grand halls as he made his way to the door, passing the portraits of ancestors who had sacrificed everything for power and lost themselves along the way. He stepped outside into the cold night air, feeling the weight of the mansion fall away behind him. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know who he would become. But he knew one thing: he couldn't stay here, drowning in the consequences of choices he could no longer justify. Inside, Eleanor sat alone, the fire crackling weakly against the vast, frozen silence. She had won, and yet there was no one left to celebrate with. No son, no grandchildren, no family, just the ticking of the grandfather clock and the bitter taste of a victory that had cost her everything. Morning sunlight spilled through the windows of our new home, painting everything in soft gold. The laughter of my children echoed down the hallway, blending with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. I sat at the dining table, my laptop open in front of me, scrolling through new contracts and customer messages for Bright Nest, the little brand that had once been stitched together from nothing but desperation and a mother's love. I paused for a moment, letting it sink in, letting the quiet joy fill me. There was no fear here, no emptiness, no walls closing in, just warmth and freedom. The twins dashed into the room, their tiny feet thumping against the hardwood floors, each proudly wearing one of my newest designs. I scooped them up into my arms, spinning them around until we collapsed onto the couch in a pile of giggles and tangled limbs. Their smiles lit up everything. This was success. This was happiness. Not the hollow kind measured by bank accounts or last names or the approval of those who had long since forfeited their right to matter, but the kind built slowly, carefully, stitch by stitch, heart by heart. Later that afternoon, as we strolled through a busy shopping center, I heard someone call my name. I turned to see a young woman, her arms full of baby clothes, her face bright with recognition. "You're Sophia Bennett, right?" she said, breathless with excitement. "The founder of Bright Nest?" I blinked, surprised, but nodded with a small smile. "Oh my God, I'm such a huge fan," she gushed. "Your story, it's so inspiring. You've shown so many of us that it's possible to rebuild, to start over, even when it feels impossible." I laughed softly, touched by her words. "I just did what I had to do," I said. "Sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself." That night, after the twins had bathed and eaten and drifted off to sleep, I sat beside their beds, telling them a bedtime story, not about princes or castles, but about a woman who had once been broken, and how she had rebuilt herself stronger than ever. My daughter, her voice thick with sleep, asked, "Mommy, did she live happily ever after?" I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "She did," I whispered, "because she made her own happiness." As I turned off the lights and stepped into the hallway, I paused at the doorway, looking back at the two small figures nestled safely in their beds. They were my why, my how, my everything. And no man, no betrayal, no legacy of cold privilege could ever take that away from me. Far away, in a mansion filled with echoes and regrets, Ethan Caldwell was grappling with the choices he had made and the life he had lost. But here, in this home built not with money, but with courage, there was only love. This was not a story about revenge, or regret, or even loss. It was a story about resilience, about choosing to rise again and again, even when the world tries to break you. It was my story, and it was just the beginning.